What are some very creepy facts? Locusts aren't a type of animal. They're a condition some grasshoppers experience. Many species of grasshoppers become locusts when they are too crowded. Literally their legs rubbing together triggers the change. Once grasshoppers start to swarm, they will join up with others, physically grow larger, change color, and eat basically anything they find. Most of a swarm will be born as part of the swarm. Increased mating is part of swarm behavior. This is why it often seems like locust swarms come out of nowhere. Edit. Whoa, this blew up. Thank you for the awards, kind strangers. Unfortunately, I'm not an expert and my Wikipedia level understanding was super lacking for a post with this many eyes on it. Here are some corrections that have been brought to my attention in the comments. A very small percent of grasshopper species swarm, and not all those that do undergo physical changes. Your garden variety grasshopper is probably harmless, especially if you're in now where there's only one species that swarms and it's super rare. Grasshoppers who do swarm are often called locusts even when not swarming. It's less of a grasshoppers catch locust situation, and more of a there are a subset of grasshoppers called locusts who swarm. Thank you to everyone who pointed out mistakes in my original. People don't take their antimalarial drugs when they travel because they hear bad stories about the side effects and they see native people in the areas living okay without taking pills every day. The truth is, populations native to malaria endemic areas have all passed through pretty intense natural selection for survival and have a host of genes that prevent them from dying or suffering the other worst effects. Also, most of the resistance is built up over time. This is why it's most common for children to die rather than adults. Whatever people have heard about the side effects of the antimalarials, getting it is so much worse. I, fortunately, have never had it, but I study it as part of my work and people have told me about having it, and they all say the same thing. It is so awful you can't believe you're even still alive. It comes in cycles, usually 48 hours, and each cycle is agonizing and brings you the brink of death. Sometimes it takes you, sometimes it spares you for another few hours, until it starts again. And there are forms that, even if you clear the infection with drugs, it still remains dormant in your system, and can come back at any time. Edit. I don't want to freak people out too much. There are drug combinations that can kill every stage of the parasite, as long as there is no drug resistance. Half of your favorite 70s rock stars had 14-year-old girlfriends = edit. Wow. I have been a Redditor for over 8 years. My previous highest comment was less than 200 upvotes, and I finally get to say it. RIP inbox. Edit 2. Yes, I realize your favorite rockstar might not have been /be a pedo /creep, but I was so disappointed to find out how many were. I hope society is moving past where this is seen as remotely okay, but then again people still work with Roman Polanski, and he was actually convicted of drugging and raping a 13-year-old. Fuck him. 13 to 14-year-olds are children. Protect children, don't sexualize them. It's not that hard. Edit 3. Enjoying the artistic work of bad people is an interesting issue. I still listen to lots of the music in question, but I don't think I would if these were active artists, and it was known. I wasn't alive in the 70s. And I certainly don't support them financially, well, any more than Spotify plays, so I guess I do to some degree. In Polanski's case, I have seen some of his older movies, but never paid for one. I wouldn't support him financially in any way and I wouldn't watch anything he makes at this point. I think it was Aziz Ansari who had an interesting bit asking the audience who still listens to R. Kelly. Not a lot of hands. Then later in the set, asked who still listens to Michael Jackson. Lots of hands and cheers. I think there is an issue of perceived guilt and also of artistic quality that plays into people's feelings. Regardless, I don't believe you should actively support known predators. From Atlas Obscura by Fodder, Thuris, and Morton. Necropants. Reader's discretion advised. In Iceland, a longest time ago, 17th C, friends followed complex rules to obtain a dead man's skin to turn them into pants. You had to get permission from the dude to use his skin after he kicked the bucket. You would then wait until burial formalities concluded. You would rob the sheet out of your buddy's grave. You would cut the waist and peel the bottom half of the body off in one perfect flay. You would then steal a coin from a poor widow, preferably your buds. Place the coin in the scrotum of the necropants to attract cosmic sheet, specifically more wealth in life, and leave the groin full of coins at all times. Pass that sheet down to your kid. Fun fact, the Museum of Icelandic Sorcery and Witchcraft has a pair on display for all of us sickos to gawk at. Edit, steal a coin additional. You are right, it's folklore. What is creepy is that they dedicated a museum to all of this faking metal folklore and bothered to create a replica of a very disturbing idea. I just thought the storytelling would be fun, and lo and behold, I had some amazing comments come from it. The origins of vampires as we know them. Basically your body has gas buildup when you die. I'm not medically inclined enough to explain why. Basically the gas has to escape somehow, and so it would pass through the vocal cords in the throat. This creates the low moan that makes the body sound as if it was in pain. The people back then had no idea what was happening and random bodies would just start moaning in pain. And thus they believed that the bodies were rising from the dead. And when stabbed, the gas escaped otherwise. Thus leading to the belief that the only way to stop a vampire was to stab a dead body in the chest. This also led to a lot of strange burials. I pointy the man that was buried in a stone wall to prevent him from rising from the dead. I can't really blame them. I'd be freaked out too if a corpse suddenly started to make sounds. Creepy for some, but I find stuff like that fascinating. There's documentaries on it talking about it. I highly recommend them. Edit. Words cannot describe how happy I'm that so many of you provided additional facts. I'm having a blast reading your comments. I don't know much about this topic, and so it's great to have a place where more information and leads are constantly being shared. This is the documentary that I saw. https://yauta.b/6bxy8vbffq4. But there's a ton of others out there with more, possibly better, information. If you have any recommendations yourselves, please link them in your comment. I'd love to see them. A Japanese secret human experimentation group called Unit 731 performed experiments on infants, children, and adults without anesthetic. They would cut out stomachs and reattach the esophagus to the intestines, remove limbs and see how long people would die from blood loss, removed parts of livers, brains and other organs. They would expose people to diseases and then dissected them alive. In all, an estimated 500,000 people were killed in these experiments. Unit 731 was given immunity from prosecution by the US government in order for the US to get access to the results of the experiments. Edit 1. To say that the above descriptions really only touch on the surface of the horrors that were performed by Unit 731. If you are squeamish, I would not recommend reading into this any further. Edit 2. To join the dots. If you've ever accessed healthcare, much of what we know about how the body responds to different traumas came from these experiments, so every time you are treated in a hospital you are indirectly benefiting from these experiments. Boots void. Massive area of space where around 2000 galaxies should be, but only 60 are. No one knows why. So far the best hypothesis is that a race of aliens is creating an absurd amount of Dyson spheres and blocking out the light from those suns. Edit. Thanks for all the karma. Edit. Also, there are some comments that this comes from disturbances in the Big Bang, or that it could be a collection of smaller voids that have come together. These are also good theories, and ones that are less creepy. That said, if it's the Big Bang, then the base theory of the Big Bang, according to what I'm reading, will have to change. If it's the smaller voids, then our model of the universe will have to change. Bottom line is that no one knows, and that is why it's creepy, because it could be any of these and the best minds in the world are at least slightly wrong, or that there is something out there that we don't have any working idea of where it came from. This is the modern day equivalent of Baba Yaga. Take care of the planet or the void will eat it. Any story about cosmonauts during the space race? Russia only wanted to get to space first. It didn't matter how many failed missions were between them, and succeeding it was all trial and error. If somebody didn't survive an attempt, they were wiped from history. Any documentation destroyed, including being edited out of photographs. One story that I remember is the first man to free walk in space. Alexei Leonov, they didn't account for the pressure difference when making his suit, so when he stepped out the suit expanding to the point of nearly falling apart, and he couldn't fit back in through the door, he had to release the oxygen from the suit to deflate it enough to get back inside. Another one is the Judica Cordiglia brothers. This one may be considered more conspiracy theory, but as far as I know the recordings are real. They were radio operators who picked up signals of very distressed sounding Russian voices and an SOS signal drifting away from Earth. When translated, the voices were calling for help, saying history would forget them, and saying it is getting very hot at it. Apparently the recordings were not real, so disregard that section. Definitely creepy, not so much fact. There's some evidence that the only pedophiles who are likely to be convicted of child molestation are pedophiles who also have a neurology with tendencies toward a lack of inhibition. The elevated white matter levels in the brains of convicted child molesters indicates that, as it's correlated with a lack of impulse control, which means that there could be a lot more people attracted to prepubescent children. It's been a while since I did any reading on the subject, but as of about 5 years ago there was preliminary evidence that around 2% of people, male and female, are sexually attracted to prepubescent children, with that number jumping up rapidly as you include pubescent children, 11-15. These are usually non-exclusive pedophiles who can have a healthy sex life with another adult. Roughly 2% of the human population is estimated to be exclusively homosexual. For scale, for every gay person you know, you probably also know a pedophile who just can't or won't act on their urges. Every now and then I come across a factoid that blows my mind, for lack of a better expression, and it usually prompts further research into the matter to verify if whether or not the fact is true. Well, ladies and gents, check this out. Within the nuclei of the many trillions of cells that make up your body contains a single strand of DNA which comprises your genetic information. If you were to extract this DNA molecule and measure it from end to end, it would be roughly 2 meters long, 6 feet. Furthermore, there exists a virus variant called a retrovirus, and once it infiltrates a host organism's cell, it merges the genetic information contained within the retrovirus into the host cell's DNA, effectively becoming part of the host organism's genome. When these infected cells replicate many times over, the inscribed genetic information via the retrovirus is also copied into the replicated cells, meaning the retrovirus has successfully merged with and has become one with a host organism. This interaction between retroviruses and host organisms have been going on for billions of years. Now here is the fact that blows my mind. Biologists think that roughly 8% to 15% of the human genome originates from and was inherited by past retroviruses infecting our evolutionary ancestors well before the first Homo sapien evolved into its current form. This means that out of the 6 feet, or 2 meters, of DNA contained within every cell of your body, about 10 inches, or 0.3 meters of that genetic information is the remnants of retroviruses. We are quite literally 8% to 15% part virus. On the 30th of September 1999 in Tokyo, Japan, 3 men were at work in the Tokaimura nuclear plant. They were manufacturing nuclear fuel. Their names were Hisashi Aochi, Masato Shinohara and Jutaka Yakowa. During the manufacture of this fuel, one of the first two made a mistake and dumped 18 kilograms of uranium into a vessel only rated for 2 kilograms of uranium. In a fraction of a second this turned that vessel into a functional nuclear reactor which promptly exploded and irradiated all 3. Masato Shinohara was transported to a hospital, where he died of his injuries on April 27, 2000 of radiation sickness. Yutaka Yakohara survived the incident, but was charged with negligence some months later. The worst fate of the 3 befell Hisashi Aochi. His skin sloughed off, his DNA was essentially deleted by the sheer force of the radiation, and he lived in excruciating pain for 87 days against his will. The doctors admitted to essentially using him as a guinea pig, trying methods to treat radiation sickness. When he was conscious he begged the doctors to let him die, and the only mercy he was granted was by the fact that he had several heart attacks which left him brain dead. So, everyone knows the stories about how fucking terrible the Russians were to the Germans during the final days or the Eastern Front, but nobody ever seems to question why these soldiers turned into monsters. Usually people just go, oh yeah, fighting Nazis, dull, and move along. Yeah, it's because, and big surprise here, the Nazis were faking awful, but especially to the Russians. For my favorite example, I'll go with the child trainings. So part of Nazi ideology is that humans exist on a scale of how great you were based on ethnicity. Well, during wars, one of the things you need is blood, because you're going to have a sheetload of transfusions. You may be asking yourself, oh, but the Germans has the Jews in camps, why don't they just use them for blood? To which the answer is simple. On that scale, Jews are not human, and therefore they were unfit as blood donors to Germans. Slavs on the other hand, despite being among the lowest possible level, were seen as being humans. So the Nazis would round up all of the Slavic children they could find, and put them into camps for the sole purpose of being living blood banks, commonly being literally bled dry. I like the removal was even more painful than necessary for the time, and kids were only fed candy to keep them alive. As a result, only 1 or 2% survived. That's the kinda shit that made Russians treat the Germans so harshly. I've read a few hundred comments, and, while I've seen a lot of space stuff, as of yet haven't seen anybody mention Fermi's paradox. So TLDR is this guy named Fermi posed the question, where is everyone in relation to the universe? The fuller question is basically, if it's mathematically impossible for us to be the only intelligent life to have ever existed in the universe, then why haven't we heard from other intelligent life yet? And of course this question, basically, it's a long story, but again this is mostly TLDR, birthed SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. Now there are basically two main theories. Either 1, we are alone. While this would suck us on a galactic scale, it is basically bullshit, but would be the preferable option in my book. Or 2, we are not alone, which is where things take a less happy turn and get super faked. Let's go with 2. We are not alone. This means we are either actually intelligent or actually unintelligent on a grand universal scale. But let's suppose for sake of argument that we are intelligent enough to be deemed intelligent by other sentient races. This leaves us with the question of either being early or late to the intergalactic intelligence scene. If we are early, then it's possible other intelligent life also haven't found a way to traverse the stars. And maybe we'll all get there someday and hold hands and sing happy songs together. Or maybe we are one of the few and there is some great barrier preventing life from evolving to intelligence. See number of intelligent vs non-intelligent species on Earth. But this most likely isn't true. So put aside hope and buckle up, because the other, and my favorite to be likely true option, given the age of the universe and shit, is that we are late to the intelligence game. We are not special. We are just another intelligent species in its infancy. Now this leads to the question then, where the fuck is everyone? And there are a few possible answers. The ultimate fate of intelligence is swift self-extinction. The vastness of space even in our own galaxy is too great to be traversed, and thus other intelligent species are possibly trapped on their own planets and asking the same questions we are. There is a super intelligence in other species, perhaps, that doesn't like to be threatened by other intelligent species, so it spends its own time actively exterminating any intelligent life it finds, so that that species may not evolve to be a threat to itself. Which could mean that all these attempts at communication we keep broadcasting into the cosmos could really bite us in the ass someday. There's a plant called Jimpiaka, the suicide plant. The Dendrochnide is a deadly plant common to northeast Australian rainforests. It's also known as the suicide plant because it has a sting so agonizing that it's said to have made a man kill himself after being stung. The treatment for a Dendrochnide sting involves removal of the plant's stinging hairs with a wax strip and treating the affected skin with diluted hydrochloric acid. The pain from the sting, however, can last for as long as 2 years, and they say it's so unbearable, it once drove a man to suicide. For 2 or 3 days the pain was almost unbearable. I couldn't work or sleep. Then it was pretty bad pain for another fortnight or so. The stinging persisted for 2 years and recurred every time I had a cold shower. There's nothing to rival it. It's 10 times worse than anything else. Ernie Ryder, who was slapped in the face and torso with the foliage in 1963, researcher and botanist Marina Hurley, described the pain of touching one of the leaves as excruciating. She likened it to being burned by hot acid and electrocuted at the same time, Curiosity.com reported. Australian Geographic expanded on her experience, citing her as saying being stung by the hairs on the green heart-shaped leaves or stem is the worst kind of pain you can imagine. The poison in the hairs is so strong, it kills the surrounding vegetation in the forest. The first known death after contact with the stinging plant was that of a horse. Australian Geographic recalled that a road surveyor in North Queensland in 1866 watched his horse go mad with pain after it was stung. It died after 2 hours of intense agony. They noted there are other local tales of animals leaping over cliffs to their death to escape the pain. Gizmodo reported that during World War II there were a number of encounters between soldiers and the unfriendly plant. One was strapped to a gurney and he screamed from pain for 3 weeks. Cyril Bromley described it as being mad as a cut snake. He also related a story of an officer who used the leaves as toilet paper. The intense pain was so extreme, he committed suicide. Another botanist, Ernie Ryder, can attest to the extremity of it. It took him 2 years to get over the pain it caused when taking a shower. TLDR, the sting from this plant is so painful, it can drive people and animals to suicide. These are a few that I like. There's a brain-eating amoeba that lives in lakes and rivers in the southern United States. About 1 in 50 people in the United States currently have a brain aneurysm that just hasn't ruptured. Dogs like squeaky toys because they mimic the screams of their prey. The air you breathe in a train station is 15% human skin. Botflies are a type of insect whose larvae burrow under your skin. Thomas Hargrove, a homicide archivist, estimates that there are over 2,000 serial killers at large right now. Every unborn baby grows a mustache in the womb, which then spreads to cover the entire body. The baby then eats this fine hair, called lanugo, and excretes it after birth with their first bowel movement. A man in Florida heard the screams of his brother from his bedroom. On reaching there, he saw the gory sight of his brother and his entire room being swallowed by a sinkhole. The body was never found even after diligent rescue operations. While filming the movie The Exorcist, many actors got injured. The set burnt down. A priest was brought in several times to bless the set, and the actor who played Burke, Jack McGowan, died of influenza. After watching a documentary of a serial killer who tortured and killed women in his basement, a woman discovered she was living in the same house as the one where the murders took place, and that her landlord was coincidentally the killer's mother. Prions are a condition where proteins in your brain have a screwed up shape and essentially poke holes in your brain like a sponge. Although it is not a disease or a virus, as there is no bacteria or virus involved, the condition is still contagious. When a misshapen protein comes into contact with a normal one, it transforms into the deadly one. Even more creepy is the fact that denaturing this protein, altering the shape so that it is no longer contagious nor harmful to your brain, is near impossible. The proteins are nearly invincible to both extremely high and low temperatures, radiation, acids and bases, and any other treatments or medicines you could think of, so there is no cure. Even creepier, they are present in almost all mammals, and since they are contagious and near invincible, they are transmissible through food. This is what mad cow disease is. The proteins in the cow's brain become denatured, causing the cow to lose most control over its behavior, hence mad cow disease. And while this is the name for the disease in cows, since most mammals share a similar form of this protein, the cow's misshapen protein is contagious to humans, making ours dangerous and giving us the disease just by eating infected meat. There are many different names for different mammals. I'm blanking on the majority of them, but in humans it is referred to as Creutzfeldt-Jakob's disease. Except when it is referred to as Kuru. This is the creepiest part. Kuru is when the prions are transmitted through cannibalism. There was a group of people living in Papua New Guinea who were rampant with Kuru during the 1900s. A group of scientists went there to discover why, and it turned out these people would eat their deceased loved ones. It was eventually theorized that one individual obtained Creutzfeldt-Jakob's disease at random, rare, but not unheard of, and when their loved ones ate them, received the disease, especially since the brain was always eaten. These people developed the nasty symptoms of Kuru, the same disease, but specifically transferred through cannibalism, which include the deterioration of muscles, leading to an inability to walk, and eventually sit upright, and eventually losing the ability to speak or even swallow. These victims are extremely malnourished and eventually die unable to communicate with the world, while never losing consciousness. They are trapped in their own bodies. Then when they died, their loved ones ate them, and kept the nasty cycle going. There are pictures on Wikipedia, if you're daring enough to see, malnourished children who can't escape the symptoms. It's pretty sad, and the pictures were taken around the 50s, so these kids have been dead for a long time. The dark and twisted poet known as Edgar Allan Poe really lived a harsh and sad life as seen and felt by his poetry. He was orphaned when his father abandoned the family and his mother fled with her 3 children. Unfortunately for Edgar and his siblings, both parents died in 1811 when Poe himself was the age of 2. He had 2 siblings, a brother, William Henry Leonard Poe, and a sister, Rosalie Mackenzie Poe, who were all separated and sent to different foster homes. His brother with their grandparents and he and his sister to different foster families. Edgar was taken in by John and Frances Allan. Poe's relationship with John Allan was a bad one. Although Edgar was given the best of educations, it never lasted for long, because John Allan would refuse to pay the rest of Edgar's education for what some said were really Edgar's gambling debts. His relationship with Frances, his foster mother, however, was one of love and endearment. At 15, the love of Edgar's life died shortly after their romance ended due to her father's interference. At 20, his beloved foster mother died as well. At age 27, Poe would go on to marry his 13-year-old first cousin, his father's niece. His foster father John Allan would die in years to come, also leaving Poe out of his will and leaving behind unresolved issues. Poe struggled financially his entire life. It is this author's personal belief that Edgar Allan Poe suffered from lifelong depression due to his many tragedies, losses and unbearable life undertakings, which I believe would lead to such storied feats of drug use, gambling and alcoholism, marked with so much darkness entwined. However, Edgar Allan was an avid scholar. He had a few published works but no money, often paid in copies of his own short stories and poetry. Subsequently, after the death of his wife from tuberculosis at the age of 24, coincidentally the same age at which his mother and brother also died, he himself would die by being poisoned cooped, which is when they would drug someone and force them to vote in whoever's favor of their choosing. It was rumored he was drunk and on opium at the time of his death, without knowing where he was or where he had been, and even still what had happened to him. Edgar Allan Poe died in the hospital on Sunday, October 7th. 1849. The mystery surrounding Poe's death has led to many myths and legends. The reality is that no one really knows for sure what happened during the last days of his life. Was it the alcoholism? Was he poisoned, robbed? Some say he had rabies. No one truly knows. And to end it off in a drama-filled epic conclusion, Edgar Allan Poe's enemy Rufus Wilmot Griswold would go on to write his obituary and say nasty things about him that shaped his narrative for centuries to come. As Poe died, Griswold took his revenge on him by assassinating his posthumous reputation and character. He depicted Poe as an inveterate drunkard, drug addict and madman. Griswold's depiction of Poe grew. Griswold began his attack on the dead writer by publishing an obituary of Edgar Allan Poe under the pen name Ludwig, in which he depicted Poe as a raving lunatic, gone mad from too much alcohol and opium, being a paranoid schizophrenic who wandered the streets in a daze of alcohol and drugs. Much of the obituary was plagiarized almost verbatim from a novel by Edward Bulwer Lytton, but few noticed. The obituary was republished in newspapers all over. Unsatisfied with his misdeeds towards Poe, Griswold managed to slither his way into the role of Poe's literary executor. He claimed Poe had told others that he wished Griswold to manage his writings, and as proof he presented a power of attorney signed by Poe's mother-in-law which assigned all of the copyrights to Griswold. But the document wasn't witnessed, and Poe's mother-in-law wasn't his next of kin, and could never own the copyrights to Poe's literary works to give away. That didn't matter, because over the years, Griswold set about to demolish Poe's reputation and profit from it. At the same time he published anthologies of Poe's works, keeping all the profits for himself and none for Poe's family. While publishing mostly fictitious biographies of Edgar, in which he expanded on his picture of Poe as a overzealous maniac. For the most part, the tragic picture of Poe as a mentally ill addict shrouded the poet, thanks to Griswold's character portrayal. Let's remember that Edgar Allan Poe was a true artist and genius who simply had a hard life and his art reflected as such. Peace Jal. Not so much creepy but interesting huh? Tim Alexander Sr. I'm not the author of the following information originally posted by u/hotdogen. Rabies. It's exceptionally common, but people just don't run into the animals that carry it often. Skunks especially, and bats. Let me paint you a picture. You go camping, and at midday you decide to take a nap in a nice little hammock. While sleeping, a tiny brown bat, in the rage stages of infection, is fidgeting in broad daylight, uncomfortable, and thirsty, due to the hydrophobia, and you snort, startling him. He goes into attack mode. Except you're asleep, and he's a little brown bat, so weighs around 6 grams. You don't even feel him land on your bare knee, and he starts to bite. His teeth are tiny, hardly enough to even break the skin, but he does manage to give you the equivalent of a tiny scrape that goes completely unnoticed. Rabies does not travel in your blood. In fact, a blood test won't even tell you if you've got it. Antibody tests may be done, but are useless if you've ever been vaccinated. You wake up, none the wiser. If you notice anything at the bite site at all, you assume you just lightly scraped it on something. The bomb has been lit, and your nervous system is the wick. The rabies will multiply along your nervous system, doing virtually no damage, and completely undetectable. You literally have no symptoms. It may be 4 days, it may be a year, but the camping trip is most likely long forgotten. Then one day your back starts to ache. Or maybe you get a slight headache. At this point, you're already dead. There is no cure. The sole caveat to this is the Milwaukee Protocol, which leaves most patients dead anyway, and the survivors mentally disabled, and is seldom done. See below. There's no treatment. It has a 100% kill rate. Absorb that. Not a single other virus on the planet has a 100% kill rate. Only rabies. And once you're symptomatic, it's over. You're dead. So what does that look like? Your headache turns into a fever, and a general feeling of being unwell. You're fidgety, uncomfortable, and scared. As the virus that has taken its time getting into your brain finds a vast network of nerve endings, it begins to rapidly reproduce, starting at the base of your brain, where your pons is located. This is the part of the brain that controls communication between the rest of the brain and body, as well as sleep cycles. Next you become anxious. You still think you have only a mild fever, but suddenly you find yourself becoming scared, even horrified, and it doesn't occur to you that you don't know why. This is because the rabies is chewing up your amygdala. As your cerebellum becomes hot with the virus, you begin to lose muscle coordination and balance. You think maybe it's a good idea to go to the doctor now, but assuming a doctor is smart enough to even run the tests necessary in the few days you have left on the planet, odds are they'll only be able to tell your loved ones what you died of later. You're twitchy, shaking, and scared. You have the normal fear of not knowing what's going on, but with the virus really faking the amygdala, this is amplified 100-fold. It's around this time the hydrophobia starts. You're horribly thirsty, you just want water, but you can't drink. Every time you do, your throat clamps shut and you vomit. This has become a legitimate active fear of water. You're thirsty, but looking at a glass of water begins to make you gag and shy back in fear. The contradiction is hard for your hot brain to see at this point. By now, the doctors will have to put you on fourths to keep you hydrated, but even that's futile. You were dead the second you had a headache. You begin hearing things, or not hearing at all as your thalamus goes. You taste sounds, you see smells. Everything starts feeling like the most horrifying acid trip anyone has ever been on. With your hippocampus long under attack, you're having trouble remembering things, especially family. You're alone, hallucinating, thirsty, confused, and absolutely, undeniably terrified. Everything scares the literal shit out of you at this point. These strange people in lab coats. These strange people standing around your bed crying, who keep trying to get you drink something and crying. And it's only been about a week since that little headache that you've completely forgotten. Time means nothing to you anymore. Funny enough, you now know how the bat felt when he bit you. Eventually, you slip into the dumb rabies phase. Your brain has started the process of shutting down. Too much of it has been turned to liquid virus. Your face droops. You drool. You're all but unaware of what's around you. A sudden noise or light might startle you, but for the most part, it's all you can do to just stare at the ground. You haven't really slept for about 72 hours. Then you die. Always, you die. And there's not one faking thing anyone can do for you. Then there's the question of what to do with your corpse. I mean, sure, burying it is the right thing to do. But the faking virus can survive in a corpse for years. You could kill every rabid animal on the planet today, and if 2 years from now, some moist, preserved, rotten hunk of used to be brain gets eaten by an animal, it starts all over. So yeah, rabies scares the shit out of me. And it's faking everywhere. Source, spent a lot of time working with rabies. Would still get my vaccinations, if I could afford them. Each time this gets reposted, there is a ton of misinformation that follows by people who simply don't know, or have heard information from others who were ill-informed. Only X number of people have died in the US in the past X years. Rabies is really rare. Yes, deaths from rabies are rare in the United States, in the neighborhood of 2 to 3 per year. This does not mean rabies is rare. The reason that mortality is so rare in the US is due to a very aggressive treatment protocol of albeit cases in the United States. If you are bitten, and you cannot identify the animal that bit you, or the animal were to die shortly after biting you, you will get post-exposure treatment. That is the protocol. Post-exposure is very effective, almost 100%, if done before you become symptomatic. It involves a series of immunoglobulin shots, many of which are at the site of the bite, as well as the vaccine given over the span of a month. Fun fact, if you're vaccinated for rabies, you may be able to be an immunoglobulin donor. It's not nearly as bad as was rumored when I was a kid. Something about getting shots in the stomach. Nothing like that. In countries without good treatment protocols, rabies is rampant. India alone sees 20,000 deaths from rabies per year. The why did nobody die of rabies in the past, if it's so dangerous? Argument. There were entire epidemics of rabies in the past, so much so that suicide or murder of those suspected to have rabies were common. In North America, the first case of human death by rabies wasn't reported until 1768. This is because rabies does not appear to be native to North America, and it spread very slowly. So slowly, in fact, that until the mid-1990s, it was assumed that Canada and northern New York didn't have rabies at all. This changed when I was personally one of the first to send in a positive rabies specimen, a raccoon, which helped spawn a cooperative US/Canada rabies bait drop sometime between 1995 and 1997. My memory shot. Unfortunately, it was too late. Rabies had already crossed into Canada. Lots of people have survived rabies using the Milwaukee Protocol. False. One woman did, and she is still recovering to this day, some 16 plus years later. There's also the possibility that she only survived due to either a genetic immunity, or possibly even was inadvertently vaccinated some other way. All other treatments ultimately failed. Even the others that were reported as successes eventually succumbed to the virus. Almost all of the attributed survivors actually received post-exposure treatment before becoming symptomatic, and many of them died anyway. Bats don't have rabies all that often. This is just a scare tactic. False. To date, 6% of bats that have been captured or come into contact with humans were rabid. This number is a lot higher when you consider that it equates to 1 in 17 bats. If the bat is allowing you to catch/touch it, the odds that there's a problem are simply too high to ignore. You have to get the treatment within 72 hours, or it won't work anyway. False. The rabies virus travels via nervous system and can take several years to reach the brain depending on the path it takes. If you've been exposed, it's never too late to get the treatment, and just because you didn't die in a week does not mean you're safe. A case of a guy incubating the virus for 8 years. At least I live in Australia. No. Please stop posting bad information every time this comes up. Rabies is not something to be shrugged off. And sadly, this kind of misinformation killed a 6-year-old just this Sunday. Stop. Before I get to the creepy fact I have for y'all, here's another fact for context. Eel babies are known as leptocephalus, which are considered one of the few visible varieties of zooplankton. They can grow to be about 10 centimeters, 4 inches, on average before developing into an actual eel, with the longest known eel being the slender moray eel around 4 meters, 13 foot, long. Now leptocephali are pretty cute looking baby animals, and under normal circumstances would have no place in a thread like this. But we have a few specimens of leptocephalus that were caught in South Africa and preserved, accurately measured to be around 2 meters, 6 feet, long. These species are given the name Leptocephalus giganteus, not because of the size of the babies, but because of the belief of the size of the adult. Typical leptocephalus are around 1/18th of the size of the adult, so if we are to believe L. giganteus has the same proportions as other leptocephali, this could mean an eel over 36 meters, 118 feet, long actually exists. However, due to the eel likely being a relative of conger eels, which have small leptocephali for their size, a terrifying 60 meters, 180 feet, is possible. There's more to the existence of such eels than just babies though. Reports of giant eels are almost a universal concept in both mythology and cryptozoology. Here are some examples below. Daedalus serpent. In 1848 the crew of the HMS Daedalus came across a species of serpentine organism in South Africa. Unlike anything they had seen before, the animal had a relatively small head of a little over a meter, 4 feet, in length, many small but sharp teeth, much like a conger eel, an almost reptilian look, and was around 18 to 20 meters, 65 feet, long. This means the animal seen by the crew was around the size of a sperm whale, the largest known macropredator. Large animals that eat other animals of a large size, alive today. Hook Island sea monster. This cryptozoological life form is one of the more famous ones, being a giant eel-like animal reported to have been seen in 1964 in the coastal waters of Hook Island. There are actual photos of the animal, and it pretty much looks exactly like an eel, being an almost 1:1 exact match to the Daedalus serpent in size and proportions. The animal has become a global phenomenon, and despite not being cited since, is one of the most well-known reports of cryptozoological life forms to this day. Cadborosaurus. Cadborosaurus is a creature that is reported to live in the Pacific Ocean off the coast of Canada. This seal-like animal has been reported since the 30s, and is believed to be deep-sea in origins. They have a horse-like head and multiple fins, so are quite unlike typical possible adult L. giganteus sightings, but they are another possible candidate, if caddies exist at all that is. However, they likely share more connection to Ogopogo, a mosasaur-like creature that dwells in Lake Okanagan, which is rather near to where caddies are sighted. TLDR giant eels exist, like freaking whale-sized eels, and they live globally, and probably inspired multiple cryptids and myths. Hansel and Gretel are based off a true story back in 1314 when a great famine struck Europe. Mothers abandoned their children, and in some cases, even ate them. Scholars believe that these tragedies gave birth to the story of Hansel and Gretel. The true story of Hansel and Gretel goes back to a cohort of tales that originated in the Baltic regions during the Great Famine of 1314 to 1322. Volcanic activity in Southeast Asia and New Zealand ushered in a period of prolonged climate change that led to crop failures and massive starvation across the globe. In Europe, the situation was particularly dire, since the food supply was already scarce. When the Great Famine struck, the results were devastating. One scholar estimated that the Great Famine impacted 400,000 square miles of Europe, 30 million people, and may have killed off up to 25% of the population in certain areas. In the process, elderly people chose voluntarily to starve to death to allow the young to live. Others committed infanticide or abandoned their children. There is also evidence of cannibalism. William Rosen in his book, The Third Horseman, cites an Estonian chronicle which states that 1315 mothers were fed their children. The popular horror movie series The Conjuring and Annabelle are based on the real-life events by Ed and Lorraine Warren. They track down people who were haunted by demons possessing both inanimate objects like the famous Annabelle doll in 1968, and also possessing people. In the movies they show a room filled with all the dolls and items that were possessed by demons. This is a real room called the Occult Museum, and it's where the real life Annabelle doll is kept locked and on display. Although once a real museum you could walk into and visit, it has since been closed to the public and is routinely blessed by a specialized priest. An important side note, Ed Warren was actually recognized by the Pope and Vatican to be the only true demonologist at the time. In one of their exorcisms, the screams and vocals produced by the person being exorcised would have severely damaged the vocal cords of any normal person. However, the young lady was able to produce several different tones in her voice that a normal person physically cannot do. In reply to, "Broomy, yep, I have a recessive genetic condition called Vogt-Koyanagi-Harada syndrome. I'm one of about 30'-ish people with it in the UK. VKH is when the immune system attacks pigment cells through the body. It first presents itself by attaching the retinas in both eyes within days. I was extremely lucky. The student of one of the only 2 VKH experts in the UK just happened to be at my hospital when I went. He recognized what he was seeing and treated me on the spot. You have to start a type of chemotherapy and very high dose steroids, about 100 mg a day for a year and a half, and steroid injections into the eyeballs themselves. I shit you not, I had 4 injections in my right eye and 3 in the left to save the eyesight and stop the immune system attacking the body. That's the start of VKH. It also causes repeated attacks of non-viral meningitis by swelling the lining of the brain and spinal cord. That happened to me 6 times, and I had 1 episode of encephalitis. It then went on to cause Crohn's by attacking the bowels. It also caused some low-level brain damage which took some time to get over. It has also been responsible for me developing idiopathic intracranial hypertension, where the body produces too much spinal fluid which puts pressure on and squeezes your brain. It is unbelievably painful. I was literally begging them to put me out. It was utterly horrific. To treat that, oh you'll love this, you have to have a lumbar puncture to drain off all the extra cerebrospinal fluid. You absolutely must not move. When they do it, they insert a rather large needle into the space where your spinal cord is. If your doctor is a little heavy-handed and you're just really unlucky, then they might hit some of your nerves on the way in too. I've only had that happen to me once, and the acid fire burning pain that shot through my right leg was like nothing else I'd ever felt. So when I first ended up in hospital with that, they were going to do a lumbar puncture to test for inflammatory marker, which is one way to see if VKH is part of the problem. However, much to their surprise, as the doctors inserted the needle into my spine, fluid that was under high pressure shot out of my back. They had to wait some time for it to stop and the pressure to normalize before they could take their vials of drops for testing. So, basically, VKH is a beach. The eyes don't quite have their own immune system, but the condition means our body's immune system doesn't recognize pigment cells in the body, and so attacks and destroys them. The initial ice caps have depleted so much the seawater under them is well over the freezing point, which has in turn started to slowly melt the permafrost underneath, causing a chain reaction and an, ironically named, exponential snowball effect / self-perpetuating loop of melting, releasing ungodly amounts of methane, which will exponentially increase as both forms of melting affect each other. I'll save you the nitty-gritty of it, but this will likely accelerate climate change far faster than what we've seen, having it get worse faster and faster. Barring extraordinary new technology, hundreds of millions, if not more likely billions, of people will die from uninhabitable areas, starvation, and huge refugee problems, leading to border disputes. It will be a very nasty time to be alive, especially around the equator. And it's coming sooner than you think, unless we take steps or invent ways to refreeze it. And if not, well, we'll likely have to start building domes or drilling underground. Humanity will survive. There's a lot of smart people, but things will never be like they were in a lifetime if this goes unchecked. Don't have kids, and if you can move to northern areas. I personally recommend Michigan due to Great Lakes. TikTok is actually a spyware funded by the Chinese government. It was recently discovered by Apple that TikTok was siphoning the clipboard every 1 2 3 keystrokes you make, even if you aren't using the app. Last year it was being slammed for a similar thing and gave a completely different excuse, but still claims to want to be entirely transparent. So one of the most popular apps on the market these days is Keylogger. It's so bad even Google called for them to remove that feature. Google, the tech giant that knows everything about you, and that was too much for them. So TikTok knows everything you type in your phone, or that you copy into it. That includes passwords, phone numbers, contacts, email addresses, messages to your if you have one, everything you search for. Oh, and since your clipboard is linked in any linked devices, you could be typing on your iPad, and your phone siphons that data. That's what I call creepy. And it isn't the only one doing it. https://www.reddit.com/ In 2009, John Jones and 10 other members of his family decided to celebrate Thanksgiving by doing some caving. At this time, John was married, had a 1-year-old daughter and a child on the way. At 8 p.m. on November 24th, John entered the Nutty Putty cave, great name by the way, 55 miles outside of the Salt Lakes at Utah, and his lack of self-awareness of his size is a main factor of his death. An hour into the cave, John starts searching for the birth canal, which is a very tight passage in the cave. John shimmied head down first to what he believed to be the canal, but John was actually in a different part of the cave, an unexplored part. John slowly began to realize that he was stuck and had no way to turn around to get out, but this is where he made his last mistake. Rescuers may have been able to get him out of where he was currently, but his next move would guarantee his final resting place. John exhaled all of his breath to suppress the size of his chest so he can go further into the crevice. When he breathed out again, and his chest extended, he became permanently stuck headfirst into a crevice that was only 10 inches across and 18 inches high. John's brother Josh reached him and tried to pull him out by his legs, but there was no hope to pull him out. As Josh tried to pull him out, John only fell down further, and as he slid, his arms became pinned underneath him, so he couldn't even budge. He couldn't move a millimeter. Josh left to go get help, and by 12:30 a.m., 4.5 hours after entering the cave, help arrived. The first rescuer, Sissy Mottler, introduced herself to John as his rescuer, but all she could see of him was his black running shoes sticking out of the hole. For 24 consecutive hours, more than 100 rescuers tried to get John out of that crevice, but the problem is, they can't get heavy equipment down that very tight path. There were warnings placed outside of the cave. In fact, the cave was so dangerous that 2 Boy Scouts had been trapped inside that cave, but due to their small size, they were able to get rescued. The cave then closed for 5 years and reopened earlier in 2009. A grave mistake. And since John was trapped upside down, his blood was rushing to his head and his heart was having to work overtime to pump blood throughout his upside down body. After one last try with the pulling system, one of the anchors became detached from the wall. There were discussions about breaking his legs to try to get him out, but that wouldn't work as he would definitely died of sepsis according to rescuers. He died after being stuck upside down, headfirst into a hole for 27 hours. This story was traumatizing for me when I first heard it, and I really wish I didn't hear it, cause as a very claustrophobic person, that's traumatizing. But IDK if it's gonna scare anyone else, so I tried, I guess. When we are doing CPR on a person and need to start an airway intubation, we use a paralytic drug called succinylcholine. It paralyzes every muscle in the body except the heart muscle, different type of muscle tissue, every muscle including the muscles you use to breath. In general, people we are intubating in the field are nowhere near being conscious because some serious medical problem preceded the need to intubate, but in the super rare case where a person is conscious, they would be fully aware of what was going on, seeing, hearing, feeling everything. They would lose the ability to breathe, no matter how hard they tried. We use a device to breathe for them. They are not in danger of suffocating, but we have to control that airway and do all the breathing for them. When we give that paralytic drug, we also give a second sedative that keeps the patient from being able to remember anything should there be any level of consciousness. In the cases where the person survived and I was able to talk to them, I've never had a patient remember anything, so that is comforting. I did have one patient that was having an irregular heart rhythm in the back of the ambulance. He was awake and alert, but his rhythm was changing and not responding to the medication he normally took. Halfway to the hospital I saw his heart rhythm go into what is called ventricular fibrillation. Basically the entire thing is quivering and not pumping any blood. He was talking and then went quiet, eyes got big and said "oh," and then his heart went into that bad rhythm. Lots of things happen rapidly at that point in a very specific order in hopes to bring that rhythm back. We give medications and start chest compressions and then shock the heart. Once all that is going we will want to intubate and make sure we can constantly get oxygen to the lungs. In goes the paralytic and the sedative, and then the tube is placed in the airway. As I was at the patient's head starting the airway I noticed tears coming out of his half-opened eyes. I wondered if perhaps the sedative didn't kick in. Maybe he wasn't fully unconscious. I don't know. Maybe he was aware. For whatever reason, that shook me. We got a fairly stable rhythm back for a bit, but it was a long way to the hospital, and he kept sliding back into VFib. They tried for nearly an hour in the emergency room, but ultimately he didn't make it. I never got to ask him if he remembered anything, but those tears haunted me. In 1922, just north of Munich in Germany, there was a farm called Hinterkaifeck where 6 brutal murders took place. All 6 occupants were killed with a mattock. A mattock looks a lot like an axe. It's a tool used for digging and making holes to plant in. I believe these murders took place in March, but I'm not sure. The people killed were the Gruber family and the maid they had at the time. The family members who died were named Andreas and Cecilia Gruber, their daughter Victoria Gabriel and Victoria's children Cecilia and Joseph. The maid who died was named Maria Baumgartner. Maria was 44, Andreas was 63, Cecilia was 72, Victoria was 35, little Cecilia was 7 and little Joseph was only 2. Both Cecilius, Victoria and Andreas were lured to the barn, where they were chopped with the mattock in the head one by one. Little Cecilia was believed to be the last one alive, and had to watch her grandparents and mother cry as they painfully bled from their heads and died. Officers found clumps of hair in little Cecilia's hands, indicating that she was so terrified that she ripped her own hair out. The killer or killers then went to the house, where they murdered Maria in the bedroom and finally, little baby Joseph as he slept in his bassinet. It's been almost a century, and although many theories have popped up, nothing has been confirmed. No one knows who did it, and even though there were over 100 suspects, they never found out who did it. Another creepy fact is that the bodies weren't found until 4 days later, and that it was suspected that killer or killers stayed and lived inside of the house until the bodies were found. Neighbors said they saw smoke coming from the chimney long after their family was dead. The farm animals had food out and were clearly fed and happy. The cows had been milked and someone had even been eating food that was fresh, that couldn't have been out for more than a day. The fact that someone killed a whole family including an elderly couple, a widowed mother, a maid, a child and a little toddler, and then lived in the house they had killed 2 people in makes me shiver. Here's a link in case you want to know more about it. https://n.mwikipedia.org/ How Churchill starved 3 million Indians to death. It is 1943, the peak of the Second World War. The place is London. The British War Cabinet is holding meetings on a famine sweeping its troubled colony India. Millions of natives mainly in eastern Bengal are starving. Leopold Amory, Secretary of State for India, and Field Marshal Sir Archibald Wavell, soon to be appointed the new Viceroy of India, are deliberating how to ship more food to the colony. But the irascible Prime Minister Winston Churchill is coming in their way. Apparently it is more important to save the Greeks and liberated countries than the Indians, and there is reluctance either to provide shipping or to reduce stocks in this country, writes Sir Wavell in his account of the meetings. Mr. Amory is more direct. Winston may be right in saying that the starvation of anyhow underfed Bengalis is less serious than sturdy Greeks, but he makes no sufficient allowance for the sense of empire responsibility in this country. He writes, some 3 million Indians died in the famine of 1943. The majority of the deaths were in Bengal. In a shocking new book, Churchill's Secret War, journalist Madhusri Mukherjee blames Mr. Churchill's policies for being largely responsible for one of the worst famines in India's history. It is a gripping and scholarly investigation into what must count as one of the most shameful chapters in the history of the empire. We dedicated well over 4.5 billion hours to watching porn on one porn site in 2016. Just on Pornhub, humanity spent twice as much time viewing porn in a year as it has spent existing on planet Earth. The site had over 90 billion video views and 44,000 visitors every minute of every day. It all adds up to over 500,000 years worth of porn consumed in the span of 12 months. In 2015, human beings have spent 1 million years watching porn. 1 million years. 1 million years. Porn is obviously America's favorite pastime. 5. According to surveys, almost 80% of American men between the ages of 18 and 30 admit to watching porn regularly. 6. Nearly 70% of men between 31 and 49 admit to it. 7. Half of men from 50 to senior citizen age also confess to regular porn viewing. 8. 30% of younger men say they watch porn every day. Porn viewership is not quite as common among women, but it's far more common today than it was 10 years ago. Remember too, this is just what people will admit to doing. 9. It's no wonder that the porn industry is worth $97 billion, which is only slightly higher, about 100 times higher, than the $750 million it was worth 20 years ago. Today, porn grosses more in a year than Hollywood. It also brings in more money than the NFL, NBA, and MLB combined. And this is just the porn industry we are talking about, meaning only the respectable official sort of filth, starring people who have porn star on their resume. If we were to quantify amateur porn and figure out what it's all worth in dollars, who knows what the number would be. 200 billion? I have no idea. 10. The science is pretty clear that all this porn consumption is bad for the brain. It may even shrink your brain, according to some studies. 11. It's even worse for your marriage, with your chance of divorce doubling if you use porn. 12. There is also a very clear and established link between such predators and porn. It isn't that watching porn will automatically turn you into a predator, but it's no coincidence that rapists and pedophiles always begin with porn. You'd be hard pressed to find a criminal deviant in 2017 who didn't begin by exploring his fetish in the freedom and anonymity of cyberspace. This is especially concerning when you consider some of the most popular porn search themes, namely incest and teens. At some point, every convicted sexual predator will be required to cooperate with a psych under specific evaluation. Sometimes, this evaluation occurs before sentencing or for juvenile's disposition. Other times, this evaluation occurs while the man is in prison serving a sentence and is coming close to release. The purpose of this evaluation is to assess the risk of that person reoffending sexually and make recommendations for treatment to, hopefully, reduce that risk. Viewing pornography is always a red flag in these evaluations. If a man/boy consumes pornography, they are going to score as a high risk to reoffend. No matter what level of treatment is recommended, abstaining from pornography will be required. Basically, you can't successfully rehabilitate a psych offender if they are still looking at porn. So why is pornography still touted as harmless? I understand that not all porn consumers are convicted psych offenders, but we know that many psych offenders are never convicted. If porn use is a red flag for reoffense, doesn't it follow it is a red flag for first offense? You can read the studies and the statistics which I've provided in the links above. But you shouldn't need to study the issue extensively to figure out if 4.5 billion hours of porn is healthy for human beings individually and human society as a whole. It also doesn't take a detective or a scientist to see how a guy who spends hours of his day indulging in perverse sexual fantasies may one day bring those fantasies into the real world. If you enjoy the simulated version of something, it means, obviously, there is something about the thing itself that you enjoy. Watching rap porn doesn't make you a rapist, but it does make you the kind of person who finds something tantalizing in rap. Watching porn where the woman is deliberately made to look like a schoolgirl doesn't make you a pedophile, but it does make you the kind of person who gets turned on by pedophilia. But even if most people just watch regular, consensual, adult-on-adult porn, what do they like about the sex they see on the screen? Well, they like how it gives them pleasure. That's it. The porn viewer is not concerned with any other aspect of sex. Pornography completely severs the sexual act from any notion of love or dignity. Sex is used like a product, and the humanity of the person on the other side of the camera is not taken into account. They are just objects to be consumed. The porn watching experience is by design empty, hollow, lifeless, and dehumanizing. This is what fuels us. 4.5 billion hours of this. A lifetime of this. 13. The average child starts watching porn around 10 or 11, an optimistic figure, I think. He is fed with a steady diet of soul-deadening, empathy-destroying hardcore porn throughout his formative years. Long before he ever has an intimate, real-life, physical moment with a woman, he has already seen women from every angle and position imaginable. He is bored of the naked female figure without ever having witnessed it in person. He never had the chance at a healthy sexual relationship because he's been in unhealthy, simulated ones since puberty. 14. Scores of young men are seeking prescriptions for Viagra because of a mysterious plague of early onset erectile dysfunction. It's no mystery. They are not able to get excited about normal, in-person sex because they are numb and desensitized from all the porn. And the problem just gets worse over time as they seek our weirder and weirder porn in order to make themselves feel something again. You don't have to be a genius to see how, through this process, porn can take a decent man and turn him into a sex predator. It happens all the time. I'm not making excuses for anyone. And I realize that many of the sex predators currently in the news did not grow up watching internet porn anyway. What I'm saying is that this current wave is nothing compared to what's on the horizon. The first step in becoming a sex predator is to see sex as an entirely selfish exercise. The next is to deny the humanity and dignity of the other person involved. The final stage is to develop a fetish for the weird and the depraved. Our born adult culture moves people through all three stages rapidly and at a very young age. Our society is now like a conveyor belt, where narcissistic degenerates are assembled by the truckload each day. You think it's bad now? Watch out. Nearly 1 in 5 women, 18.3%, and 1 in 71 men, 1.4%, in the United States have been raped at some time in their lives, including completed forced penetration, attempted forced penetration, or alcohol/drug facilitated completed penetration. More than half, 51.1%, of female victims of rape reported being raped by an intimate partner and 40.8% by an acquaintance. For male victims, more than half, 52.4%, reported being raped by an acquaintance and 15.1% by a stranger. Approximately 1 in 21 men, 4.8%, reported that they were made to penetrate someone else during their lifetime. Most men who were made to penetrate someone else reported that the perpetrator was either an intimate partner, 44.8%, or an acquaintance, 44.7%. An estimated 13% of women and 6% of men have experienced sexual coercion in their lifetime, that is, unwanted sexual penetration, after being pressured in a non-physical way, and 27.2% of women and 11.7% of men have experienced unwanted sexual contact. Most female victims of completed rape, 79.6%, experienced their first rape before the age of 25. 42.2% experienced their first completed rape before the age of 18 years. More than 1/4 of male victims of completed rape, 27.8%, experienced their first rape when they were 10 years of age or younger. Source: NISVS 2015 data. Brief. Sexual violence by any perpetrator. Approximately 1 in 5, 21.3%, or an estimated 25.5 million women in the US reported completed or attempted rape at some point in their lifetime, including completed forced penetration, attempted forced penetration, or alcohol/drug facilitated completed penetration. About 2.6% of US men, an estimated 2.8 million, experienced completed or attempted rape victimization in their lifetime. About 1 in 14 men, 7.1%, or nearly 7.9 million, in the US was made to penetrate someone else, attempted or completed, at some point in their lifetime. approximately 1 in 6 women, 16.1% or an estimated 19.2 million women, and approximately 1 in 10 men, 9.6% or an estimated 10.6 million men, experienced sexual coercion, for instance. Being worn down by someone who repeatedly asked for sexual pressure due to someone using their influence or authority at some point in their lifetime. A majority of female victims of completed or attempted rap first experienced such victimization early in life, with 81.3%, nearly 20.8 million victims, reporting that it first occurred prior to age 25. The majority of male victims, 70.8% or an estimated 2.0 million, of completed or attempted rap reported that their first experience occurred prior to age 25. Smith and others, 2018, p2, source NCS 2018. 37% of the total violent victimization experienced was identified as rap, sexual assault, robbery, or aggravated assault. The self-reported incidence of rap or sexual assault more than doubled from 1.4 victimizations per 1,000 persons aged 12 or older in 2017 to 2.7 in 2018. Based on data from the survey, it is estimated that 734,630 people were raped, threatened, attempted, or completed in the United States in 2018. Despite the increase in self-reports of rap and sexual assault, there was a decrease in reporting to police from 2017 to 2018. 40% of rapes and sexual assaults were reported to police in 2017, but only about 25% were reported to police in 2018. And most people that are charged with the crime rarely see even a courtroom for it, or are severely undercharged for their actions, and usually are repeat offenders. Last but not least, there are hundreds of thousands of untested rap kits in evidence lockers all across America, most of which will never be tested because of lack of funds and care about the crimes. And false accusations are only 1% of reports in most areas.